Teaching is stressful. In fact, some studies show that teachers are the most stressed profession in the world. With increasing workload, meetings, accountability, and students with complex needs, teachers are struggling. And when teachers struggle, so do students. In this session, I'll share what research reveals are the main sources of teacher stress and burnout. And I'll offer an antidote to teacher stress, Restorative Practices as a Wellbeing Initiative that goes beyond staff barbecues and addresses root causes to help your school and each individual in its community to flourish. Hi, I'm Mooiman, and I'm so glad to be part of the Relational Schools Conference. I'm actually talking to you from The Hague. I moved to the Netherlands 2 years ago from the US, where I was a school social worker turned district administrator for over 20 years. In my most recent position, I was a director in a large school district of 18,000 students, and I was responsible for student well-being programs, as well as implementing restorative practices and positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS. Now I'm an educational consultant and trainer working with schools around the world to improve school culture and climate, reduce student discipline issues, and to create safe, positive, and restorative schools. In this session, we'll start by exploring the main causes of teacher stress and how the brain's stress response system impacts teachers and their students. Then I'll share why restorative practices is an antidote to many of the stressors in schools and how by implementing it at your school, teacher well-being will improve. Finally, we'll talk about how to promote self-care for all teachers and staff to increase their resilience to the very real pressures in schools. Teacher stress and burnout have been the focus of extensive research, identifying pressures in no particular order of high job demands, in other words, workload, poor working conditions, lack of autonomy, student misbehavior, poor relationships at work, and a poor school climate as the main contributors of teacher stress. Conversely, it's important to consider that teachers who experience warm classroom communities and have strong relationships at work credit this as a core reason for staying in the profession. So let's take a closer look at the neurology of stress. The brainstem controls all the major systems needed to keep us alive, like heart rate and breathing. The limbic system is the part of the brain that determines how we feel about something. Is it scary or exciting, frustrating or fun? In the limbic system, the amygdala acts like a smoke detector to identify a potential threat and sound the alarm. The hypothalamus hears the alarm and communicates that message to the rest of the body by signaling the release of cortisol, the stress hormone, so that we're prepared to respond with fight, flight, or freeze. Together, we can think of the limbic system and the brainstem as the emotional brain. And then you have the neocortex, the thinking brain, and that's responsible for reasoning, planning, problem solving, making meaning of our experiences, and regulating our emotions and behaviors. So when we're faced with a threat, the thinking brain helps us to decide when we're actually in danger and then helps us return to a state of calm after the threat has passed. But here's the problem. When people are chronically presented with stressors, even small things can trigger a stress response. When a student talks back, or a colleague says something insensitive, or another meeting is added to a teacher's already full calendar, it can trigger a fight response, like yelling or being punitive with students, or a flight response, like checking out of meetings and daydreaming about retirement, or freeze responses, like becoming disconnected or unresponsive. Chronically stressed out or burned out teachers display a lack of flexibility and low frustration tolerance, and the constant flow of cortisol into their system can create serious health problems. And on top of it all, one study measured cortisol level in elementary school students and their teachers and linked teacher stress to students' physiological stress regulation. It turned out that teachers who scored high on a teacher burnout rating scale had students with significantly higher cortisol levels. In other words, stress is contagious. The good news is that just as there is a neurobiology of stress, there's also a neurobiology of trust, relationships, and connection, which is mediated by a hormonal cascade called the oxytocin cascade, or the love hormone. One of the most important things about oxytocin is that it opposes cortisol. Relationships filled with trust are the antidote to the experience of stress. If we set up our schools to be filled with safe, supportive relationships, we can help repair and heal the stressed out brain of not only teachers, but students as well. And this is where restorative practices comes in. Restorative practices are a set of skills for building community and for responding to challenging behavior in schools. Restorative practices comes from the long history of restorative justice, which is based on the idea of sitting in circles for meeting and discussing issues, and it's evolved in nearly every culture. It probably started by people in a community sitting around a fire. Restorative practices provide teachers with the tools that they need to address where the stress is coming from in the first place, specifically student misbehavior, poor relationships at work, and a poor school climate. These practices are really simply structured conversations, and they fall on a continuum ranging from low intensity, less planning, classroom-based strategies, all the way to higher intensity, more structured, office-managed strategies. In schools, the foundation of restorative practices are classroom circles, also called community circles. The class sits in a circle where they can see each other and take turns speaking about a topic. Maybe they're building community. Maybe there's a problem and they're expressing emotions and solving the conflict. Or maybe the teacher is using the circle to deliver academic instruction in a highly engaging way. In a circle, everyone has an opportunity to contribute and power is shared. A circle can be as short as 10 minutes or as long as the whole class period. It really depends on the purpose of the circle and the needs of the community. Another practice is affective language, both statements and questions that we can use to express how we're impacted by someone else's behavior without making them defensive, because we're going to focus on needs instead of blame. Restorative chats are an informal, facilitated conversation using the restorative questions to solve problems. Restorative mediation helps us resolve conflict between two people that's mutual with harm on both sides. Restorative circles, also called harm circles, help us respond to a problem when more people are involved and we want to hear what happened, who was affected, and how we need to repair the harm. Then there are restorative conferences, which are structured circles designed to respond to significantly disruptive or harmful incidents at school, with those who did the harm and those who were harmed, as well as other people who were impacted. While schools who implement restorative practices tend to have very few out-of-school suspensions, when it does happen, we have reentry circles when the student returns so that we can make a plan of support for them and their families. Those of you that are familiar with the multi-tiered system of support, MTSS pyramid, I find it's really helpful to integrate the restorative strategies into each tier so that these practices become part of the universal, targeted, and intensive interventions at your school. At Tier 1, we incorporate classroom circles to build community, deliver academic instruction, and to problem solve. We use affective language with students in everyday conversations. And at Tier 2, we may use some restorative conversations like restorative chats, mediation, and circles to respond to tensions and conflict. And at Tier 3, we have more formal conferences and reentry circles to address more serious incidences of harm. By incorporating restorative practices into your MTSS framework, it's going to be a much more sustainable initiative. So why are restorative practices important? Why does it work? The primary research base for restorative practices is found in social bonding and the neurobiological components of creating trusting relationships. All of us are hardwired to connect with others, and in the same way that we need food and shelter, we also need deep and meaningful relationships. Consider Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. All day long, teachers are asked to meet self-actualization needs of students so that they meet their full potential, they can collaborate and be creative, yet so many underlying needs are just not met. We must have our basic physiological needs met, like food, shelter, and water, in order to learn. We also need to have safety needs met. We need to feel physically and emotionally secure at school, where there's order and predictability. And then we have belonging needs. And here's where circles come in. Circles improve relationships, and relationships matter. In a review of 46 educational research studies, they found that strong teacher-student relationships were associated with higher academic engagement, improved attendance, higher grades, and fewer disruptive behaviors. Fewer suspensions, lower school dropout rates, decrease in student and teacher anxiety, and an increase in student and teacher overall well-being. In other words, using circles can provide more time for learning, not less. So if we look back at our list of stressors for teachers, we can see how restorative practices reduces student misbehavior by creating a classroom community that helps students to understand and care about how their behavior impacts the people around them. And when issues arise, you can use a circle to help you solve problems and repair harm. I've known teachers who have held classroom circles to talk about lack of homework completion, bullying in the classroom, or lack of collaboration, so that they can hear what the students think the problem is and get their ideas on how to fix it. Circles can also be used to solve bigger student misbehavior issues. A few months ago, I was asked to help a large high school who was having problems with vandalism in the boys' bathroom. For months and months, the boys were tearing soap dispensers and paper towel dispensers off the walls, flushing vape pens down the toilets, and graffiti on the bathroom stalls. On 2 occasions, they even tore sinks off the walls, all during the school day. Then it all came to a head when a student brought a boombox and started a dance party in the bathroom during lunch. About 60 to 70 teenage boys swarmed, crowding into the bathroom, and then continued to damage sinks, toilets, stalls, and dispensers. They flushed so many vape pens down the toilet that the entire school sewage system backed up into the outside corridors. Due to inconsistent monitoring, lack of cameras, and a sheer number of people involved, there was no real proof of who was to blame. No one person or group that they could pin the responsibility on. The school leaders wanted to bring people together to address the situation and find out what was going on. To find out what the unmet needs were in the school to be making this happen, not once but over and over again. We invited students who represented an important part of the school community. Different grade levels, boys and girls, not just top students, but leaders of other social groups. We also invited the school custodian, assistant principals, the school district director of maintenance and operations, and a few teachers. By the time we held the circle, we had about 40 people, all prepared to participate and speak openly about the needs in the school. I invited each person to share how they were impacted by the problem. One boy said because the boys' bathroom felt so unsafe, he wouldn't drink water at school all day, leaving him with headaches from dehydration. Another girl broke down crying when she described how disgusting it was to have the sewage backing up into the corridor after the boys had flushed the vape pens down the toilet. She said the smell made her so nauseous and it was so strong that students couldn't even focus in class. And the new school custodian said that she had to throw away her brand new shoes and all of her clothes after cleaning up the sewage flood. The director of operations shared that the vandalism had cost the school over $23,000 that school year. Some students did actually admit to the part they played. One boy admitted, "Yeah, I was the one who brought the boombox that day for a dance party in the bathroom." But then he went on to say, "I did it because there's nothing to do, no fun activities at lunch anymore." So this helped us begin to understand the needs in the group. It came out that the teachers who used to run the noontime lunch activities were angry at the school principal, so they refused to coordinate the lunchtime events anymore. The only activities that were happening were cheerleaders dancing, which only appealed to a small group of students, leaving many others to feel that they were no longer valued parts of the community. Agreements were made to resume lunchtime activities that were more inclusive by having students from the circle form a committee. The director of operations and school administrators invited the students to join them on a walkthrough of the school to see what could be done to improve the overall cleanliness of the campus. Some of the students responsible for the vandalism volunteered to stand with the campus supervisors and help monitor the bathrooms during lunch on a rotating schedule. The vandalism that had plagued the school for nearly a year came to a complete halt as each group began to follow through with their commitments and became a community once again. And restorative practices is not just for kids. It's also effective in the workplace to address poor or strained relationships at work. We know that the health of relationships among staff is a major contributor to teacher well-being. Using circles in staff meetings helps us build positive relationships and a sense of community. Lots of school teams use circles to share opinions, thoughts, and feelings with each other, to brainstorm ideas, and to make decisions collaboratively. And when conflicts and tensions exist among adults in the workplace, especially if wrongdoing has occurred, restorative practices provides tools to resolve them so that people can work meaningfully and deeply with their colleagues to repair harm. Once I facilitated a circle for a school staff that could not even get through a staff meeting without someone walking out, yelling, or breaking down in tears. In our circle, we were able to share how each person was impacted by this behavior. Especially powerful were the new teachers, who until then had always been really quiet and kind of withdrawn. And when they shared how they didn't like going in the staff lounge and how they dreaded staff meetings because of all the negativity and the unkind behavior, the older teachers were shocked. It hadn't even occurred to them how their feuding made the new teachers feel. They were isolated and lonely. Together, they made some agreements about how they wanted to treat each other moving forward, and the school principal held them to these agreements, and relationships improved. Instead of toxic relationships filled with gossip, retaliation, sabotage, escalation of conflict, or withdrawal, restorative practices help schools address issues directly and effectively so that people can heal and move forward. By using circles both to build community and to resolve conflict and tensions among the adults you work with, leaders will gain trust, people will feel heard, and relationships can be restored. Using a restorative approach to address adult behavior at work can significantly reduce interpersonal stress, making teachers happier and more content at their schools, fostering a positive work culture, and ultimately bringing measurable gains for students. Restorative practices also addresses the major stressor of poor school climate. Research shows that classrooms in which teachers used restorative practices, like giving voice, facilitating circles, and reintegrating students into class after misbehavior, they reported much higher rates on school climate surveys. Students who experienced restorative practices in their classrooms had more positive feelings towards their teacher and peers, more voice and input, and an increased connectedness to the school. They had better peer friendships, developed more social skills, they were more empathetic and more assertive. Using restorative practices was even associated with lower rates of cyberbullying. Restorative practices also did some interesting things for equity. The number of days lost to suspension declined across the school, but even more so for low income and students of color. In other words, not only did restorative practices improve the school climate and relationships, but restorative practices significantly improved equity in the discipline of these schools and became a tool for inclusion. Restorative practices improves the school climate for students and staff because it provides meaningful ways to address misbehavior in schools, and it creates structure to build relationships and strengthen schools as communities. By implementing restorative practices, you'll significantly reduce stressors for teachers and schools. Student misbehavior, poor relationships, and school climate will all improve. And by extension, teachers may feel a lesser need for autonomy because their working relationships have improved. Other causes of stress, like workload and poor working conditions, they remain, and they must still be addressed at the school and district level in collaborative ways. With that in mind, it's important for teachers and school staff to develop self-care strategies to build resilience to stress and improve their overall well-being. Now, when I say self-care strategies, I'm talking about behaviors, thoughts, and actions that you can learn that'll build your ability to adapt in the face of adversity, to bounce back from the ups and downs of life, and to move forward. Now, resilience, it's not a trait that you have or you don't have. It's a skill, like riding a bike, and the more you practice, the better you'll be. Now, to be clear, resilience isn't about toughing it out or reacting to everything with serenity and a smile. Resilient people still feel sad and angry or frustrated when they're faced with setbacks, but they find ways to move forward, to tackle challenges with creativity, hope, and a positive attitude. I've included a self-care checklist in your handout that can help you evaluate 5 dimensions of well-being in your life. It's designed to help you acknowledge positive routines and behaviors that you already have, and then guide you to create a self-care plan to adopt new strategies that'll promote resilience in your life. Take a few minutes to complete the self-care checklist. Press pause on the video and start it again when you're done. Now that you've completed it, what was this process of filling out the checklist like for you? Were you surprised by any of your responses? And if so, which ones? In what areas are you strongest, weakest? As a next step on your self-care checklist, select one self-care strategy that you already do and one that you would like to work on for each domain. Then, select 3 to 5 that you're going to commit to trying. Now, as you complete the self-care checklist, just know that everyone's self-care plan will be unique, and it'll probably change over time. There's no exact formula for self-care, but you can kind of whittle it down to 3 main components: Think of them as the ABCs of self-care. The first is awareness of one's limits, resources, and emotions. Self-care begins by quieting our busy lives so that we can develop an awareness of how we're really feeling and allow ourselves to actually feel it. We need to take the time to reflect on what we're able to do and what we're not able to do. So often we act first without understanding what we really need, and then we wonder why we're feeling more burdened than relieved. The next is balance among personal and professional activities like working, playing, and resting. This balance guides decisions about letting go of certain activities, behaviors, or even attitudes that are unhelpful and embracing more helpful ones. The last is connection to others in a meaningful way. Healthy self-care does not take place solely within yourself, but involves being connected with others to do something bigger than yourself. We grow and thrive through connections with friends, family, social groups, nature, spiritual practices, and lots of other ways. These connections are especially powerful if they're with your colleagues and students at school, where you spend most of your time, and that is where restorative practices can really make a difference. Self-care is really important, but it's not enough. We cannot self-care our way out of very real stressors that educators face every day. Until we begin to address the causes of the stress in schools, we'll always be trying to manage problems instead of solving problems. And that's why I believe that Restorative Practices is a well-being initiative for teachers. It clearly addresses many of the core reasons that teachers are stressed. And in combination with healthy self-care, teachers can find passion in their work again. Teacher well-being is dependent upon forming healthy relationships with both their colleagues and their students. So we need to provide teachers with the tools to build community and to respond to conflict and tension in effective ways. Restorative practices increases trusting relationships, which, neurologically speaking, is an antidote to stress for both students and teachers, and well-being improves. Thanks for attending my session. I hope that you found the session empowering and that you have the encouragement you need, along with a healthy dose of practical ideas to help your school and each individual in your community to flourish. If you have any questions, the conference organizers are setting up a time for us to have a live conversation. So please save your questions or comments, and I look forward to talking to you soon. And you can always go to my website, lauramoiman.com, and download free resources, watch free training videos, check out my online courses, and connect with me there. Thanks.